Welcome to the Stefan Larrivee podcast.
Welcome, podcast listeners. This is Stefan Larrivee podcast, episode 28, and my guests today are Francis Pouliot and Etienne Larrivee from Satoshi Portal and Cyphernode. So, welcome and thanks for coming on, Francis and Etienne.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it's great to get you guys on. I've seen some of your social media work, Francis and Etienne. I've had a look through the Cyphernode GitHub project, and I've heard a bit about this project, and I thought it would be a really good thing to discuss on the podcast because it's very in line with the whole Bitcoin ethos. This whole idea of don't trust, verify, and not your keys, not your coins, as we say in Bitcoin. So you know what, maybe we'll start, if you guys could just tell us a little bit about yourselves, a little bit about Satoshi Portal.
Yeah, Etienne, do you want to start?
Okay, I can. So I'm Etienne Larrivee. I've been developing software for the last 25 years. And I used to work for major companies like banks or, here in Quebec, there's Hydro-Quebec that is responsible for electricity here in Quebec, and I've been in the Bitcoin field for 4 or 5 years. It's a rabbit hole, like everybody says, and I fell off in there, and I'm still trying to get out of there, but I won't get out of there, I guess. So. That's it for me.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so my name is Francis Pouliot. I'm the founder and CEO of Satoshi Portal, and Etienne is our Bitcoin engineer at Satoshi Portal. So Etienne works with me there in our Montreal office. So I founded Satoshi Portal almost 4 years ago. The kind of context of what we do. So our goal and our mission is to build the financial and software infrastructure for the Bitcoin standard. And I started out in Bitcoin at the Bitcoin Embassy, which was like a physical hub. You can kind of think of it like as a mix of a coin center, where we did lobbying and PR and reaching out to journalists and publishing research and stuff. And also an Apple store, because we had a physical office and people would come in and we would do workshops and those kind of things. And eventually we also opened a currency exchange counter there where people would buy and sell Bitcoin, and we had ATMs and that kind of stuff. So we started to build this software to automate our OTC brokerage. And then in 2015, I launched Satoshi Portal, which owns and operates on-ramp and off-ramp apps. Our major product and service is bills. So bills allows Canadians to pay their bills with Bitcoin, very simply, and third-party invoices like your rent, your credit cards, your electricity, and that kind of stuff. So we're a payment processor. We're Canada's first and largest. Bills has existed since 2013. It was founded by one of the Bitcoin Embassy founders, and Satoshi Portal bought it in 2015. And we also operate an online OTC service called Bitcoin Outlet, where people, they buy Bitcoins online. They link their bank account, they send fiat, and we send Bitcoins to their wallet, to their own wallets. So we're OTC brokers, but we also build these software stacks and suites. Everything that we own and use in our services, we build ourselves. So we have a development team of four. So yes, that's for the background of what I did. So I started out kind of as a educator and a public person, to get the regulators on board, to get the financial institutions on board. And then we kind of realized that there was still these frictions. Like the Bitcoin standard could not happen if it wasn't easy for people to really get in and out. And since we had so much proximity to the end user, we were like, well, let's just build it, right? So we were dissatisfied with kind of the standards, the level of standards in the industry. and we said, well, let's just build. We have higher standards. We have different methodologies, different approaches. You don't want to. You can't complain about Coinbase. I mean, this isn't a democracy. You can't vote for which exchange or which approach to Bitcoin is the one that the users adopt. You have to just build it and convince people to come. So that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I like the idea that you guys are really trying to build and take accountability rather than just sort of sit there throwing stones. You're actually going out there to try to make a project that helps people be more self-reliant and use Bitcoin in the way it was intended to be used. Now, one of those examples is the Cyphernode project, which I wanted to get you guys to talk about. So maybe you guys want to just give the listeners an overview on what the Cyphernode is.
Okay, sure. I'll start, and then Etienne is the lead developer of Cyphernode, so Etienne can take over. And when we talk about more specifically, like what it actually is from a technical and real point of view, but the concept of Cyphernode is an open source project. First of all, it's financed and built and maintained by us at Satoshi Portal. But we have outside contributors now that we're going to talk about that a bit later, but that are contributing. So it's a Bitcoin full node API that's open source. So it's a microservices API server, and it's a utilities toolkit to build applications, to build Bitcoin applications. And the kind of features and approach that we have is to build, modular, scalable, secure Bitcoin backends without any trusted third party. So in order to kind of understand like what it is and what it's useful for, we can kind of look at quickly what's the alternative and what are people using and why we're proposing this to the market. So, when we started out and built Bills the first time, we didn't even have a Bitcoin engineer. We had nothing. We just had this PHP site, and we literally would enter in the admin panel like hundreds of Bitcoin addresses that it would just like cycle through. And believe it or not, in the first year and a half, 2 years of Bills, we would check them manually in a block explorer, like daily. We would just check those Bitcoin addresses to see if we had received something. And then obviously we, like all the other Bitcoin startups, like when you scale and you hire development teams, what you'll do is you'll use any service that uses Bitcoin, like an online wallet, a payment processor, a checkout, any app that's interacting with Bitcoin needs to have some connection to the Bitcoin network to know when it's received money, for instance, or to broadcast transactions. So people use third-party APIs like blockchain.info, blocker.io, Coinbase, BitPay, Cipher, and BitGo. These are basically software as a service companies, and you connect your app to these things via an application programming interface, and you basically use it to generate Bitcoin addresses, to receive notifications of payment, and to control some online wallets to, for example, process withdrawals to users. So these third-party software as a service companies are Bitcoin nodes as a service. They're network peers as a service. And when you're developing like a web application, this is really useful and it's really easy. If you're a software developer and you have a mandate to do like a checkout for Bitcoin or something, or integrate the blockchain, timestamping, whatever it is that you want to use Bitcoin for, you're going to look for these APIs because that's what's easy. And the difficulty of using Bitcoin Core directly is very big. Usually, if you're building a Bitcoin app, you'll have to use multiple software libraries and other apps. Like, you have Bitcoin, you have Lightning, for example. People are using Lightning Charge. Then you have like BTC Pay Server. Then people are using Bitcoin JavaScript to create like invoices and some stuff in the browsers. Then they use a hardware wallet. You're using a lot of different components, and it's just much easier for people that don't really know the ethos of Bitcoin to do that. So Cyphernode is an alternative to that, to these third party APIs. And what it is basically we open sourced their business model, their backends. So when you're a third party, when you're an app and you want to integrate Bitcoin, you don't control what's in the back end of the API. You just like your app is just asking them to do stuff, but you don't know what's going on in the back end. So what we did is we knew how these things work. We integrated in Satoshi Portal after all those years. I mean, probably like 10 of these. We have a pretty good experience of what this is, and we built APIs ourselves. So we said let's just open source it and do it. So so that's what it is essentially. It's your own blockchain.info server essentially that you're running on your own machine that you deploy yourself, and that your app or whatever can outsource all sorts of complex Bitcoin functions. So yeah, and Etienne, Stefan, do you have any questions on me before Etienne kind of moves on to like what it is technically?
Actually, one other thing might be good to ask was just around, do you see, so you mentioned how it's common to use APIs with sites like blockchain.info.
Yeah.
Do you see any security risks or centralization risks around this common process?
Yes, absolutely. So that's the motivation behind us doing that, and us, taking a lot of our time and a lot of financial and human resources. Is that we really believe that there is a big problem in Bitcoin. It's just kind of like an elephant in the room, and that is I believe is a huge risk attack vector. It's probably the biggest in my opinion to Bitcoin, and it is. So when I was in Riga, I did a speech and I had this this schema, this chart, this illustration, which shows that what makes Bitcoin, the features of Bitcoin that are desirable and scarce are the result of this decentralization, because all the nodes are verifying the integrity of the blockchain, of the rules themselves. So the kind of integrity of Bitcoin is at the edges, is at the peer level, and that's what makes Bitcoin immutable. For instance, immutability in Bitcoin is not a feature in the code. That's it's not software. It's because everybody's validating himself, the rules in the chain, and same thing for the immutability of the rules. And for instance, why is there a 21 million Bitcoin limit? It's because nodes are enforcing this rule, and that's what makes Bitcoin scarce. That's the features of Bitcoin. They're not in the code. It's the nodes enforcing the rules which make the network. And the more nodes and the more decentralized, and it became apparent most of all when it came to SegWit activation and protocol changes. So that was the genesis of us launching Cyphernode. I don't want to talk too long because I've been talking for a while, but I can tell you a little bit about how it launched, like how we got the idea through UASF. And that's when we realized that it's at that point that we realized that all the other startups were using third-party APIs. Is because when we wanted to do UASF, we actually committed to it. Like we were going to do it. We were going to go on that chain, and we realized that none of the third-party APIs were offering UASF nodes. So we had to build our replacements ourselves. And when we did our advocacy, and when we started to do a lot of research, and I took basically like 5 months off, like just for UASF and SegWit during that time. Like I was just flying to conferences, trying to get SegWit happen. And we really realized like it was about, in my opinion, 10 or 12 companies that were, validating 90%, I think, probably of all transactions. Either they were explorers like blockchain.info, or wallets, or toolkits, or exchanges, or white label solutions. So I don't I don't think they fully realize this themselves, but in terms of enforcing the rules and activating new rules, for example, like these 10 or 12 companies like Coinbase, BitPay, etc., they do have a lot more power than they should, because the theory of the game theory of Bitcoin and the Schelling point relies on the idea that everybody's enforcing the rules and you can change and switch. And if the users want it more than others, they can, the equilibrium would go in the market, right? So if there's different rule sets, ultimately the one that will have demand will dominate, and the other ones will follow there. But it relies on the idea that people are moving from one chain to another freely. While in reality, since they're all relying on these third parties, it's the third parties themselves, like those APIs, those services, those Bitcoin nodes as a service businesses that are deciding. And it's not easy to switch. Like to rebuild your app around your own Bitcoin core node is really difficult. So it's skewing, I think, the consensus equilibrium that these companies have so much power. And the only thing we can do is to reduce the cost of running the node and to increase the convenience of running your own node software, so that there's really no excuse. And it's kind of the same philosophy also as BTC Pay, which is to just kind of copy like the API model. Like how do people integrate BitPay right now and the merchants? In our case, it's more, we don't do a business logic. We just do the kind of Bitcoin and crypto functions, but still we look at how the startups use these APIs and we replicate it. And so that's the idea. So the our mission is to make it easier for people to run nodes, because we know that even some people told me Bitcoin, really smart Bitcoin leaders, prominent people, that there's no such thing as externalities in Bitcoin, and that other people's behavior is meaningless because it's anti-fragile. And for example, if people are not running their own nodes, it's their own problem. We can just run ours and we'll be fine. Well, that may be true philosophically, like in the long term, like in a view of like a century or something like that. But if, for example, there's another fork, for example, or if these companies decide that we don't want this new privacy feature to get into Bitcoin, then we're going to have a lot of disruption. It's not a good thing. So this possibility must not even exist. And the last point is that I saw in person that it's really hard for consensus to emerge organically, which is good, right? It's hard for the whole Bitcoin ecosystem migrate to a new set of rules. I think that would happen, for example, if there was a technical issue with Bitcoin, like an update or a crypto function being broken or something, or, for example, SegWit, or if it ever becomes necessary to change the format of the blocks one day. But it should be really hard to do, and that's really good. But what's not hard to do, because the reason why it's hard is because Bitcoin's anonymous, and although we coordinate on Twitter and everything, it's kind of hard for the whole network of nodes to just spontaneously agree on a new set of rules. Whereas it is not hard for 15 to 20 companies to meet in a hotel room and to sign an agreement. That's not hard at all. That's been done in the past. I've been at those meetings, and I didn't like what I saw, which was people kind of not explicitly saying they're deciding for the Bitcoin network, but acting just as if, and making decisions. So so that's what we're trying to avoid, and that's the whole idea of investing in this thing, is to ultimately increase the value of our Bitcoins, for one, because just as when SegWit was activated, the price of Bitcoin went from $2,000 to $20,000. Right after, we understand that the value of our investment, of our holdings in Bitcoin, which is which is why we do this thing, is because we own and we huddle Bitcoin. We're Bitcoin maximalists, right? So by making Bitcoin more decentralized, we're kind of hoping also to increase and maintain the value proposition of Bitcoin.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I think the way I'd summarize most of that discussion, and obviously agreed on your points there, Francis. I think one way to summarize it is actually one of our friends, Pierre Rochard, would probably say that SegWit 2x kind of movement or proposal was not respecting the decentralized governance process that Bitcoin uses, where people run their own node and then you have to sort of run your node and hope that everyone else shows up at the same shelling point that you do. And then in terms of summarizing, what I think the Cyphernode helps people do is it helps people be on the chain that they want to be on. Because if they didn't have the ability to run their own node with their own rule set of transaction validation rules, then there's a risk then that they would be forced, quote unquote, forced onto a chain that they don't actually want to be on. So let's now talk through a couple example functions that you can do on the Cyphernode. So maybe Etienne, you can talk through a few examples. I was looking through the GitHub. There's watch addresses, get TX details. Do you want to go on?
Yeah, sure. Well, at first we wanted to use as a client as being bills and Bitcoin outlet. We wanted to use our own product before even publicize it. So what we developed first was functions that we needed. So in the perspective of a user that is going to pay his bill with Bitcoin, the thing is what we need as an application like bills is generate a Bitcoin address so that the user can pay on that Bitcoin address, and we want to be notified when the payment comes in. So one of the things we first implemented was the watch address function. So we want to watch an address, and we tell Cyphernode, hey, call me back when there's a payment on that address with some information about your transaction. So we have a system of callbacks in Cyphernode that when a payment comes on a watch address, Cyphernode says, okay, there's a payment there. What's that payment about? Okay, I'm going to call back the client. In that case, it's bills. And bills can, show on the screen, display about the payment that's been received. So that callback is important for the zero conf and the one confirmation transaction. So when the transaction is confirmed on the block, then we can go ahead with our process. Okay.
Sure. And then how about interaction with the Lightning Network? Is that also possible?
Yeah, and it's funny because at first, at the beginning, like last year when we talked about the project, the project was not Cyphernode. We just wanted to implement Lightning Network in builds and Bitcoin outlet. So I presented to Francis my idea of a product that would take care of Lightning Network. And actually, that with time, with months, became Cyphernode. So we decided to postpone Lightning Network functionalities a little bit later, but right now it's implemented. There's some functions, basic functions for Lightning Network, like create an invoice and pay. And we want to. There's a lot to do, but we want to make sure that when there's a payment, a Lightning payment coming, we want to be notified also.
Maybe it would be a good idea to kind of also explain like what it actually is, like the Docker architecture of Cyphernode. It's a little bit technical, but I think it's kind of useful to understand like how we, and this is also the technology that we're using, Docker, and maybe Etienne can also talk about maybe later some of the more technical components. But so when you're launching Cyphernode, like what you're actually doing is you're launching a network of virtual machines, and each virtual machine is running a software set, right? So imagine that and each virtual machine is talking to each other and sending data and commands to each other through an encrypted network, right? That you're launching, that you're spawning, for example. And then one of the components is Bitcoin Core, is your Bitcoin Core node. One of the components might be your Lightning node. One of the components might be the Open Timestamp, like software. Another one might be we have PyCoin, JavaScript libraries, and all those things. And the kind of core of what Cyphernode is we call it the proxy, and that's a request handler and a request dispatcher, which has a library of like preset functions and some database to keep stuff, right? To know stuff. And what basically we do is we allow people to send commands to the proxy. Say, for example, create me an invoice or something, and then within the proxy that says, okay, so I need to go talk to this software and that software and this software, and there's a scheduling batching server that I can use. I can talk to this one. If I want to sign the invoice with a PGP key, for example, in bills, like the typical flow would be we have a hardware wallet in which we use we receive the coins. The coins are received directly in a hardware wallet. So we take the master public key of that and we give it to Cyphernode, and we choose the SegWit derivation path. We can choose beg32 or whatever we want, and we tell it, all right, give me an address. So we that goes to PyCoin, for example, right? That's a PyCoin job. And then all right, so then we want to watch it. All right, so send it to the callback server. All right, so we want to sign it with a PGP key. All right, so send the data to the PGP virtual machine and sign it there and send it back. So that's what it is. It receives like commands, and we can program it. The idea is to get contributors to code all sorts of commands, right? And we can talk about some of the ones that we're going to do later. But any kind of command, and then it's going to outsource that job to your own private cloud of Bitcoin software that are just talking to each other. And if you want to add something, well, the way that Etienne coded it as an architecture, a lot of the thought, it was a really long thought process for a really simple architecture. But essentially, you just add your Docker software. You just add whatever program you want in there, and then you add an endpoint. You add a function. Say, all right, so either you just delegate a task to your software. For example, if we added open timestamp, and you can timestamp, verify a timestamp, for example, and get information on a timestamp. Just put that in a container, a Docker container, plug it in the network, and through the API, we just add 3 endpoints. Stamp this hash, verify this open timestamp certificate, and get info on a timestamp, and that's it. So anybody can add that. So when we when Etienne creates the watch address function or batch function or derive function, that's essentially what we're doing. Is we're creating these new different sets of actions that are calling the software components.
Yeah, I really wanted it to be, very easy for contributors to add modules, add functionalities, and that kind of architecture makes it quite easy to add the stuff, because there's it's only pluggable modules that you add, and you change or edit or add functionalities to that proxy that dispatches the request. So we had in mind that we wanted to open source something, and have contributors to the project. So that makes it easier.
Fantastic. Okay, let's talk about the process then of setting one up. So I think, Francis, you touched on that a little bit with the Docker container image. Maybe if you guys could tell us a little bit about how would you set one up and what kind of hardware requirements are there?
Yeah, the setup of a Cyphernode is pretty manual for now. I documented all the steps to make it work completely, but it's a heavy process, I guess, a heavy procedure. But there's someone contributing right now to Cyphernode. His name is SKP. Shout out to him. He's working hard and doing a great job on the installation process. He's trying to make it easy and automatic to install Cyphernode anywhere you want. So that will help a lot because it's one of the friction right now for Cyphernode, the installation process.
And just to add on that, so SKP, like, huge shout out to this contributor who's been like rocking so many contributions and lines of code for us. So basically what he's doing, like the ultimate vision, and we're not far from there. I mean, we're working on that, like Etienne's working on that full time, right? So I mean, we're getting there. I mean, it's a matter of weeks, I think, before we have the final vision of the launch complete. But the idea for me is that I'm not a programmer, although listeners might think I am technical, but I am not a programmer. I cannot talk to the machine, and I've always been really frustrated when I'm doing research on open source projects. For example, like Join Market or Electrum. I want to run my Electrum personal server, but I can't use the command line to save my life. I can't. I try to do those things and I can't. And I know there's a lot of people like me out there. So the idea is that we're gonna have this web app, which has been built by a company called Lunanode, which is a cloud service provider from Canada. And we hooked them up with a BTC Pay server, and they built that for a BTC Pay server. And we're gonna reuse it for ourselves, which is like a web app where all you need to do to run this like enterprise grade stuff is you go on a cloud hosting provider. And what's funny is, with the promotion that we have, like the referral, you get $20 for free. And then you just take an API key that's in there. You just go in your dashboard and you just generate an API key. You copy paste it. You go back to our web app and you just paste your API key, and then you start the process of launching the Cyphernode. And what we do in the back end is, after we're done with our like automated install, we can just launch it for you on your own machine. And our vision for Cyphernode, the security model, is hardware wallets. That's how we're basing our security approach. Is keep in line with the modular vision of Bitcoin, which is that there's you have to control your keys. You have to validate the blocks yourself and the transactions yourself and broadcast them yourself, but you don't have to do them on the same machine at all. So we use hardware wallets. We are going to use hardware. We don't have it now for the security. One of the neat things you can do, for example, with Trezor, is when you're launching your Cyphernode through a web app, you can actually like hard code the Trezor into Cyphernode, so that you can only give commands to Cyphernode through your Trezor, right? That's something that's possible to do, which prevents us, for example, or Lunanode, basically from tampering with your stuff. So all of that done through like a web UI, right? And then when we already have that in command line. When you're launching it, the configurations that you want, they're manual, because programmers and product designers tend to forget that some users, they do want to manually edit the configs. And sure, I'll add an Electrum server to my Cyphernode, or oh yeah, sure, I'll add this timestamping functionality, and I want it to do this and that. I want the password to be this. I want the batching schedule to be this. Like, this is the stuff that a lot of people can't do themselves. They need a programmer to do. So we want to have that all, in a graphical user interface, as we say. So that's the kind of, and then the ultimate end goal is that, you click a button and then it launches your Cyphernode.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, to answer your question about hardware requirement, I always have in mind that I want to be able to run it on a Raspberry Pi. So I know it's like a little bit cliche, but well, it makes sense. And so it's really tiny. It's really lightweight. Right now, I'm running a full Cipher node, including the Bitcoin node, on a server that has like 2 gigs of RAM and 20 gigs of disk. And, it costs like $5 per month to be able to run the whole Cipher node.
Excellent. So it's very cheap to run. I presume that's then in pruned mode, but obviously still fully validating. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the security on this then. So I like the point you were mentioning before, Francis, around using a hardware wallet, and it's sort of reminiscent of offline signing with Armory.
Yeah, that's definitely part of the security. Well, the security approach is multiple angles. Like, security is not a binary thing. So there is I'll let you talk about that for sure. Like, there is the Docker network swarm security aspect of it, which is very crucial, and that we realized. And then maybe to take a step back, my approach to security and Etienne's approach to security is that if you're a junior web developer, or you're anyone who's an integrator in software development, like, you can build an app these days with just like, you launch like some JavaScript framework, you plug a few APIs, and then in like, 2 days, you have an app, right, that you can prototype or something. And to take a step back even further, through the whole years of me advising startups and participating in hackathons, like, I do all these things, meetups and stuff and workshops, I realized that the junior devs, when they choose a tech, like an API or something, they usually stick with it for a long time. Like, people don't tend to change their practices. If it ain't broken, don't fix it type of mentality, and they just kind of move on. So security for me is that a junior dev should be able to not like worry about the security and not be, and you should also be able to hire a foreign consultant, for example, remotely, and not have to trust him, right? So the security model is, a lot of it is based on the authentication between whoever's controlling the network and the network. And part of that is offline signing. So one of the really good things that just recently came out in Bitcoin Core is partially signed Bitcoin transactions, BIP 174. And what that finally allows us to do is to ask the Bitcoin Core software, which is connected to the network and has the blockchain, and he has what we call the unspent transaction output set. So that's a key component of running your own full node, is that when you're creating a transaction in Bitcoin, you know that certain inputs have this amount of money and that they exist because you have the blockchain, because you have them. And then Bitcoin Core can create this neat new file format and send it securely somewhere else that has software. That can be, in our case, that's going to be the cold card device by Rodolfo Novak and Peter Gray from CoinKite. So that's a huge part of the security, is that, or Trezor, for example, or a Trezor hardware or a Ledger hardware. And again, we'll only need to add a Docker piece, and that's what we have. So that's a huge component. And Etienne, do you want to go deeper into also the security of the network?
Yeah, sure. Of course, there's still we still have the hot wallet. So it, we take we put a lot of importance on the cold wallet stuff, but for the convenience, we need the hot wallet. So the thing is, well, it's more easy for a thief to get in the house if there's 20 doors. If there's only one door, it's easier to secure it. So that's how we did it. Cyphernode doesn't publish any port anywhere outside of Docker, outside of the swarm, which is an encrypted over the swarm network. So the only port that is published or exposed is the API port, the HTTPS TLS port. So and it should not be exposed to the public internet, because how we see Cyphernode, it should be used as a personal piece of software. So it should be inside your LAN, and then even if it's inside your LAN, it should be encrypted, because there's people on your LAN. Even if you are inside of a company, there's employees that could sniff the packets or anything. So and we actually also want to have an API key that will secure all the accesses of Cyphernode. So everything is secure. And at first we wanted to distribute Cyphernode everywhere. Like when you're using a Docker swarm, you can spawn the swarm between a lot of servers around the world. So it is possible to do it because the overlay network is encrypted. But by default, the installation is going to be on the same machine for convenience, for cost reduction, and also it's easier to secure.
Etienne, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about, in the process of creating the Cyphernode software, what other projects were you able to leverage code from?
Yeah, one of the concept I wanted to apply is I want to make the less possible code myself. I want to use piece of code that is working and that has experience in the world. So yeah, so why code when it exists? Why code an HTTP client inside a program instead of using like curl in Unix or Linux? There's the cron tab that works perfectly for all the schedule stuff. I'm not going to implement a new scheduler myself if it exists, and it's been working for the last 30 years. So I guess it's a great piece of software. So I'm going to use it. I'm going to use built-in functionality into the Linux shells, like I don't know. There's the cut tr curl is not built-in, but it's piece of software that comes with the OS and are well documented and have communities that take care of everything. So I wanted to use all those tools in Cyphernode.
The other thing I thought that the listeners would like to hear is just a discussion around what's coming down the pipeline in the future with Cyphernode in terms of new features. So, for example, things like address identification validation, Paynim integration, Electrum personal server. Do you guys want to just outline some thoughts there?
Yeah, sure. So like Cyphernode is really at the beginning. It is definitely so. What we're gonna do first is release what we call the 0.1 version. So right now, Cyphernode, like what's public right now is what we're using. Like it's working. Like it's been working for, I don't know. It's in like 3 months, maybe.
Maybe more.
Maybe more.
Between 3 and 6 months. Yeah.
Yeah, right, for sure. And then it was working a while back. Yeah, that's true. But like the current version now, it's perfectly fine. However, what we were missing is like that automated installation and public API authentication system, which Etienne has recently merged in, and the installation is gonna merge in. So we're gonna like announce like a first release, which is gonna be packaged on Docker Hub. That means that it's like easy to install, and it's like officially signed. But the major feature that's coming is the user interface. So the vision is that Cyphernode is also a wallet, because it's a way to remote control Bitcoin Core and other stuff. But like, let's just using Bitcoin Core as an example. So if you can control like Bitcoin Core and send it commands, you can say send Bitcoins here or there. And my vision is that the Bitcoin wallets as they exist now should not, like, I don't like the way that has been implemented, because the way that I see it, like, you generate your keys on secure hardware, like your Trezor or your Cold Card or whatever. That's one part of the wallet, and the other part of the wallet is broadcasting and looking at the blockchain. So we're gonna like build a UI, which is kind of like a web wallet, an explorer, and like all the functions that we want, like the open timestamps component, and it's also going to be the administrator dashboard for the API. And like, we're gonna we have a lot of like specs in mind that are cool, like mempool stats and graphs. We found SKP built a super neat like Lightning Network viewer where you can like click on like nodes and stuff connected to your own node, like so you get the data and stuff from your own node, and also like just a wallet interface, right? Because you can click send or receive, and you can view your transactions by contacting remotely your Cyphernode with your UI. So this stuff, basically, what it's going to be is going to be packaged in. So when you launch Cyphernode, it launches this web app on the same server, or in the same Docker swarm. And then the vision that I have is like BTC Pay, for example. You can put your own domain name for it if you want, or you type in your IP in your browser, and you plug in your Trezor, and you connect to your dashboard, and you log in with your Trezor authentication. There's like a little program that you just look at your Trezor, and it says like, do you want to log into Cyphernode? And you just like, press the button. It's really neat. And then you're there, and then you can send Bitcoins. It's your self-hosted web wallet. So that's a key component that's going to make it useful for you and I, right? For everyday people. You have your Trezor, and instead of going on Trezor.io, or instead of going on your Samurai wallet or something, or you just go on your own self-hosted app.
Yeah, and I like the idea there that you can, some of these apps are setting up, like, for example, Samurai Wallet has a feature called Trusted Node, and I think other applications have a similar one where, perhaps you can get to a future where you use your Cyphernode as your trusted node.
Absolutely. So my idea is also to look at these open source wallets, and Samurai is a great example. Like, I think Etienne and I like to think that where there is some kind of like a cypherpunk, I think, renaissance, if you want to call it that, in Bitcoin. And it's really cool. Like, there's projects out there. The ones that we like a lot are Samurai, BTC Pay. Nicolas Dorier is a true legend, a hero of Bitcoin for sure. There's I like Wasabi Wallet also, and all sorts of projects. And there's a No Wallet, for example, a secure brain wallet app, and then we can plug these all to a Cyphernode backend, because a lot of these have a hard time to do all the functions of Bitcoin. One of the ones that's usually not seen is to fetch the unspent transaction output set for the wallet to be able to create transactions. And usually they will like have a centralized API, like just for that part. And when you're like broadcasting, you can check the blockchain using your trusted node, but to craft transactions, usually there's also another API involved. So yeah, we want to replace all of that for sure, and connect to these existing projects.
Fantastic. I think I really like this project. It sounds like it's very, again, as we were saying, it's very in line with the Bitcoin ethos. But one area that I do ask a question, or a question comes to mind, is, look, so because the code is open source, because you're not kind of clipping the ticket on things, how do you make it sustainable from a revenue point of view? Or is it just seen more like, Bitcoin companies should just try to support this sort of development on the side?
That's a good question. Well, first things first is like we do need to develop Bitcoin software as part of our apps. And it's not really just at the level where we're at in bills, for example. We are processing a lot of like Bitcoin payments. This is an expense that people should do regardless. So a lot of the work that Etienne is doing, certainly would have taken a lot less time if we didn't plan on open sourcing it. But a lot of the work we would have had to do ourselves, because in the kind of business vision, it's not like optional to control your own Bitcoin node and your own Bitcoin keys. Like that's the fundamental first principle of Bitcoin. And if you forget that, and like you can't just like do something and then forget it for years. Like that's something you need to maintain. And then, the project is pretty much out of pocket. So there's no immediate plans to monetize it. And the decision to do that was just that we're very busy at Bills and Bitcoin Outlet to do our startup, our payments and exchange. We have it's basically an automated arbitrage operation that we run in Canada. So we don't really have time to like monetize Cyphernode. So we just like, okay, let's just open source it, and it's like a kind of like a legacy project for Etienne and I. Right, Etienne has been in Bitcoin for a long time, and so have I. And we were like, all right, let's do something that people are gonna really like, and that's gonna last a long time.
Excellent. Okay. So, listeners, you can find the site at satoshiportal.com, and you can follow the guys on Twitter. So, Etienne is Kexkey, Kexkey, and Francis is, his name, Francis Pouliot _. So, guys, maybe just as a closing comment, maybe just tell the listeners, where should they go if they want to learn more, and maybe if there's any tips for a user of Cyphernode.
Well, I guess the first place to go would be the GitHub repo of Cyphernode, where we have a lot of documentations and what's our vision and what the next features that we want, how to contribute. We know we are not the best for everything, so we need all the best people everywhere in the world. So just join the party and contribute to it. So there's also the Francis is going to commit soon the manifesto. That is pretty interesting also, huh?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, Cypher. We have the like Cyphernode.io, and I'm not sure if I put the Slack group up there yet, but we also started a Slack channel, that's just go on there, and if you want some features if you want to chat, in terms of sustainability of the project, Etienne and I. Eventually, when we have a little bit more time in the few coming weeks or months, we plan on trying to do workshops. I'm a big fan of the approach of Bitcoin Uptech, which is by John Newberry from Chain Code, which is the idea is to kind of have a consulting service, if you like, which helps Bitcoin companies, or rather, which helps like institutions or large Bitcoin stakeholders to run their own nodes using Cyphernode, and to kind of audit and check their Bitcoin setup, and to suggest to them ways to, for example, have more scalable practices like open timestamp. For example, a lot of companies, they just use OP return. That means that they are ineffectively using the blockchain, in essence, not to take too much time to explain. So there's also a possibility if businesses or people in the industry that are listening like the project and want to contribute. I think we're gonna kind of start to do an internship program, maybe looking for some funding to hire a full-time contributor or that kind of stuff. So my DMs are open on Twitter. We have a contact at satoshiportal.com email for anybody that maybe wants to integrate it in their app and would like, I think we'd love to help people to install it and test it and get their feedback. Like we develop this stuff with iterative feedback loops, so we need users, and if it's still too hard to install, we can help.
Oh, and actually, last question. When is it launching? Just to remind the audience.
Well, it's already launched. It's just maybe a little bit difficult to grasp. So the kind of out of the box version, which is much easier to run. Etienne, when do you think we're gonna launch it?
Well, I hope by the end of the month. So we have a lot of testing to do, and make something complex be easy is a challenge. So
yeah, so maybe like a week or two or something like that.
Okay, excellent. Well, we'll just say kind of late October, early November. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much it for this episode. Thank you very much, Francis and Etienne, for coming on the show.
It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much, Stefan.
I hope you found the discussion with Francis and Etienne interesting. That was definitely a more technical discussion, but I trust that you guys are smart cookies and you were able to follow along for most of it. Anyway, the ability to use a Cyphernode for conducting your own business without placing unnecessary reliance on external third-party services or APIs is very much in line with the Bitcoin ethos. At the very least, it provides another option. It's also cool how it's modular and could someday be paired up with other Bitcoin products and services, such as a Trezor for hardware wallet signing of transactions. Or perhaps you might use a mobile Bitcoin wallet and point it towards your own Cyphernode. I think of it as a cool piece of business infrastructure that will help Bitcoin businesses be more self-reliant and help individuals maintain their monetary sovereignty. If you have any feedback or suggestions for episodes, come find me on Twitter at Stefan Livera. My DMs are open. As usual, if you haven't already, please just take 30 seconds out to give my show an Apple iTunes review. 5-star reviews really help me out. Thanks guys, see you next time.